I'm Johan Rashi Vega, and here we are in the sound room of Holyoke Media, One Court Plaza in Holyoke, Mass. I want to welcome Mimi Panitch, newly elected City Councilor at Large for the City Council of the City of Holyoke. Mimi, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. And first of all, congratulations on being elected
Thank you so
City,
much.
City Councilor at Large. And I hope we get the chance to know a little bit about, of course, about you, but how these first days officially as a city councilor at large have been and open up the new possibilities for this 2 years government in the city of Holyoke.
Again, thank you for doing this. Um, and thank you to Holyoke Media. This is such an asset to the city. It is one of our ongoing problems, as I think I said over and over during the campaign, is that we just don't have a good enough flow of information between the citizens who know what's happening and know what the issues are in this city, and the government, which tries to address them. And because no one is really educated in how the city works until they find themselves doing some kind of city job, at which point they begin to learn. And we don't have any regular coverage of how all of this works. It can be very difficult for you as a citizen. You know that there's something that needs to be corrected, or you know there's something systemic that needs to be corrected, and you start off with no idea how to get it done, who to call, who to write to, what to do if they don't seem to be writing back to you. And one of the things that I think Holyoke Media and this process can really help with is starting to make those connections so that if you have an issue, you know that, for instance, the mayor might not be the place to start. The mayor might have no influence whatsoever. Or calling the DPW might help if you know the right person to call. And if the DPW can connect with the city council about all of the information it needs to really address your problem. And a lot of this, everybody in the city government knows is an issue, and we've been trying to fix it. But one of the things about having a new council and a bunch of people who come in with no idea what we're doing, frankly, is that sometimes what you need is not experts. Sometimes what you need is people who are learning on the job, who have no idea what isn't possible, and who can take a fresh look and say, but wait, what if we tried XYZ? And, one example of this is if you happen to be watching the Charter and Rules meeting from Wednesday night, and there is no reason, I'm just saying, that you should be watching the Charter and Rules meeting on Wednesday night. But if you did, you will have seen that one of the things that Councillor McGrath Smith, who is not on the committee, and Councillor Linda Bacon from Ward 5, who is, and I and others have been trying to do, is work out a process that will address things like when you call and say, we have a speeding problem on this particular street in the city. Can we get speed humps? Can we get a crosswalk here? What about this giant pothole that might swallow my car? So we have had for a long time a system whereby what would happen is that you would call your city councilor, probably, your ward councilor, and they would introduce an order in city council that the DPW address this. And at that point, it would fall off the face of the earth. Certainly we would tell the DPW, or the council as it was, and certainly the DPW would hear it and put it on a list somewhere. But it turns out that there's all of this information that the DPW needs and that the city council needs to really address a lot of this. If you need speed humps, or think you do, the city engineer has to take a look at the street. It turns out, I didn't know this until 2 weeks ago, that there has to be a certain distance between speed humps. You can't put them too close together. You can't put just one. The engineer has to know. There are expenses involved. So to budget for this, everyone involved has to know what a reasonable estimate of the cost is. And it needs to be on a list with what everybody else needs done, so that when the time comes, if there isn't enough money in the budget to do everything, and we're certainly working on that, but we can expect that there will not be enough money in the budget to do everything. At least we can look at priorities, and when we look at them, have that information about, all right, does the DPW have the resources that it needs to physically do this? If not, when will it? And is this a place where we should be putting the money, or is there something more urgent that has to go in front of it? And a lot of what we did on Wednesday night is look at the problem, which was initially framed as, why are all of these DPW orders on the general city council agenda? And is there a better process that we can construct so that certainly we want all of this stuff reported, we want it to be addressed, but can we get it off the general agenda and into a format where we'll be able to work with the DPW, and the DPW will be able to work independently as necessary, and actually start getting these things done in some orderly way, which in turn will free up the city council to look at other things. And there are all kinds of little processes like this all over the city. And if you meet any of the newly elected councilors, you'll see this kind of haunted look in all of our eyes. It's like, okay, we're still learning. We had no idea how complicated this was. Even those of us who've been on city boards and commissions have no idea how complicated this was. And just how difficult doing the work to correct it can be. Which, if you want to get me off this train of thought, now is your chance before I start complaining about the open meetings law.
Well, you are bringing a really strong point of awareness related to how experience is important, because with that experience, who holds it can share it and put up to date whoever is coming new. And that sounds like the logical process of keeping things updating and catching up with whoever needs to in terms of bringing new ideas, new people, and allowing the ones who have been for a while holding these positions can also take a moment to enjoy the fruits of their work and not having to worry that much about it, knowing that they have done the work, and also leaving behind that legacy and that knowledge on people who will know how to carry on that responsibility. However, you also mentioned there is a particular situation where newly elected members of the city council come in and realize, I have no idea what's going on here. And maybe there is that missing piece where people who have been for a long time could have done something better in terms of creating that legacy. Is just something that sometimes it just happens. There is so much to do, of course. But at the same time, it's important to bring it to the table so it can become part of the way of doing things, because it is at the same time part of the work. And going back to the point of experience, you have been serving for the past 15 years in the planning board of the city. So you have experience, and still you are facing new challenges and things that are completely new. So how this contrast is taking effect, since you got officially in functions as city councilor at large.
Yeah, it is interesting to see what you know and what you don't know when you're on a board. And the planning board, which also doesn't quite do what people believe it does, comes with deep experience about our zoning ordinance, which is long, complicated, in some ways in desperate needs of updating. And one of the things that I think we all hope to do is we've been working on a new comprehensive plan for the city, which involves changes to the zoning ordinance, long overdue. It involves all sorts of things that will have subtle but real impacts on what businesses can go where, what housing can be built. And it's a huge package, and knowing what it does, I think, is going to help steer it through the city council, which will have to approve all of it. And I'm sure we'll take the time to review what's there. But at the same time, it's narrow experience. I came into the city council role with some thought of one thing that I can do as a city councilor that I hope will be helpful is I can, to a certain extent, translate between the planning board and the council itself. And that just has not been something that we've been able to do previously. In part, I think, because no city councilor has actually had the time to learn planning and what OPED overall does. But, one of the things I came in knowing and hope to address, like in the next month or two, with the help of both bodies, is for historical reasons, there are all of these special permits that are granted by the city council. If you want to open a business that needs a drive-through lane, you need a special permit. The applications currently are heard by the Committee on Development and Government Relations in the City Council, and their recommendations are ultimately approved by the full council. The DGR committee, it is not really their job to know what the traffic engineers are telling them when they come in with an application and, all right, here's why this is completely non-problematic and you should approve it. The planning board does know. If you've spent any time on the planning board, you have learned a certain amount of traffic engineering, which traffic engineers themselves tell you, it's not that hard. You can pick it up, but you have to be motivated. You have to see a bunch of these things. And nobody likes the current system, to the best of my knowledge. The city councilors don't particularly want to hear about how you collect traffic counts and why the square footage of a building doesn't really necessarily reflect how many trips are going to go through it, but it's the only metric they have, so they use it anyway. And it's not what people elected them to do. The planning board hears this stuff all the time and can ask the relevant questions. And getting it off the DGR agenda and back to the planning board will be an asset to everybody. And this is a discussion that goes back to the days of, I don't remember now what his term years were, but Councillor Gordon Alexander, who was representing Ward 7 for 2 terms, tried desperately to get this done. I mean, there are a whole package of these, so it's not just this one permit. It's a whole list that takes up a couple of pages. But I hope now we can finally get it done, and that will release time for us to address other things. And I think it will both lead to better decisions and ultimately fewer situations where the planning board feels compelled to say no to something and we wind up in litigation. And just a better experience for businesses, for the city. But meanwhile, the city council desperately needs this time because there's a lot of work we aren't allowed to do outside public meetings. And one of the things that struck me in the past year, I hadn't done the math, is okay, you've got 13 city councilors. You have a city council agenda that is not supposed to run past 10 p.m. They open at 7. 3 hours for an agenda that can be 70 items long. If you assume that most councilors want to speak to an issue, you're there all night, and you still haven't covered the work that needs to be done. There has been no opportunity for the full council to address the details of these issues necessarily. And to some extent, that's my plan. The work is supposed to be done in committee so that we don't tie the whole body down. And if every member of the council who has a concern about a given issue is available for the committee meetings where they're brought up, then it can work, subject to how long you're willing to have the item sit in committee. Which also is an issue, because one of the things that it took me a few weeks to get used to about being a councilor rather than a planning board member is, by tradition, the planning board just works through it, whatever it is. The meetings begin at 5:30, and when I first came onto the planning board, we occasionally would do a public hearing jointly with the city council. So we had meetings where we started at 5:30, we went through some of our business, we broke to come over to city council chambers and sat through a city council meeting. If we could decide on the spot, we went out in the hall and voted. A lot of the time we couldn't. And then we would march back to the annex and keep going. We had meetings that lasted 5 hours, 5.5 hours. And it was just part of the gig. As a new planning board member, you're looking to your colleagues to see what is done. And what is done is working until the end of the agenda, because what are you going to do? Rarely there were times when it was a big public thing in front of us, like an attempt to bring the big Y in, which ultimately failed for complicated reasons. But those meetings were big enough that we had to, in the pre-Zoom days, book like a school auditorium to actually get everybody. And every so often you would find yourself being, okay, we have kept this public hearing running for 3 hours. We are going to continue it. Come on back, everybody who hasn't had a chance to speak. So it is not like that on the city council, and in many cases for good reasons. We don't really pay city councilors much of anything, and many of the councilors wind up putting their salary right back into their districts. I think Jenny Rivera spends almost all of her, it's like an honorarium, on her constituents and their needs. But what this means is that for those of us who aren't retired, or I suppose independently wealthy, I'm sure there are a few people in the city who could just do this full time, but basically everybody has to have a day job. I mean, I'm old enough that I don't, but I'm very rare. I think Patty Devine is probably the only other one. And you can't ask somebody who is getting up at 6 a.m. to do their day job, to do the activities that are associated with their day job, to also be in an ordinance meeting that starts at 6:30 and runs till 10. Our chair needs for those meetings to be over by 8:30, 8:45. So a great deal of the work that the council does, it has very limited time to do. And because of the open meeting law, which I basically support. I think the public should have access to what we're doing. But it means that we can't just grab an hour here or there to get together and figure out, okay, we had this idea, how do we refine it? I can go home from my charter and rules meeting, and I can, when the recording is available, rerun it. I can listen to everything that we said. I can individually attempt to write a rule that will reflect what we've got so far. But I can't then send it round to my colleagues to say, if you can comment on this, we can get it really in great shape and just pass it on next Wednesday. And again, there are good reasons for that. I support it, but I understand much better than I did why it takes the city council forever to do anything.
And that becomes critical in sharing even these frustrations that can pile up pretty quick in the experiences of everybody in the city, the constituents, the voters, and the people who are dealing with issues that they keep happening, that to see any solution implemented takes a long, long time. And sometimes by the time any decision is made, they may feel it doesn't even make any sense anymore to do anything about it. So this creates an interesting conundrum, because you are clearly explaining that the processes need to happen in a way that they are efficient, that they are well discussed, that they are open and transparent for everybody to have participation and opportunity of knowing what is happening and how it's happening. And at the same time, how this can be done in such a way that things that have a priority, a genuine priority, and need to be expedited can also be done in such a way that the needs, the demands of the constituents can be addressed.
Yes, and I think this is a lot of what I think lies behind what we're trying to do. And this is also like a public service announcement. Please, if you hear this and you are frustrated by your government's failure to respond to you, keep nagging us. Do not assume that you are being dismissed because you didn't hear back. Come to public comment, zoom into public comment. It is true that public comment before the city council is limited to 2 minutes, but this is one of the things that if we ever have more time, I really hope to change. And a contrast between the planning board and city council is that the planning board really, really wanted to make time for anyone who bothers to come in to be heard, whether it was in a public meeting where it's at the discretion of the body, or whether it's a public hearing where you have an actual right. And at some point, we're going to have a fight about that, I suspect, on the council. Because, ages ago, we got legal advice on the planning board that if it's a public hearing, the public has a right to meaningfully participate. Like, you don't just get 2 minutes because you're a member of the public or whatever. If you have something new to say and it takes 7 minutes, if it's relevant information, the body has a responsibility to hear it, and you have a right to present it. So that's how the planning board ran its public hearings. The city council, and I understand the impatience, because again, the time is so limited, I think has not always been as receptive. But we do want to hear it. And if you've got something that's complicated enough to have to be an email or a document, please let whoever you think is the most relevant city councilor know, and stay in touch if the situation has changed. If you had a critical issue and it hasn't been addressed, and the problem has now morphed into something else. Keep us updated, because there are only 13 of us, and we only see what you bring to us. In fact, there's this whole classic book called Seeing Like a State that addresses this problem. And I often want to give people little handouts from it. But information is often the problem. It's not indifference, and it isn't always lack of means to address it. It's what do we know, what do only you know, because there's something important that every citizen in this town knows that nobody else knows, or nobody else has the same insight into. And ideally, we need all that.
So, Mimi, how do you feel from the moment on Election Day, November 4th, 2025, your name came on the list of candidates running for City Council at large who got into that top 6, realizing that you got in after a number of attempts in the past to wanting to join the City Council, and now you are in functions, and it's a lot of work ahead of you, but I think it measures in the same level of the energy and the eagerness of wanting to do this work.
Oh, thank you for that question. I keep telling people I feel like the dog that caught the car, from back in the days when dogs were allowed to run free. Because the horrible truth is, I have run many times for this position, and I kind of felt like the great thing about doing the campaigning is that it forced people to pay attention to your issues, because they never knew. You might get elected. But there were things that I couldn't bring myself to do, and there was a point where it was really like the campaign is the fun part, and it was extremely gratifying to come in just shy. I think I was the 7th candidate a bunch of times, and it was like, okay, people who are not actually my family have voted for me, so this isn't humiliating, and at the same time, this is great. I don't have to do the stupid job. So after the first couple of times, my supporters would come around and say, well, yeah, okay, are you going to actually campaign this time? Or is this another one of your, I'm going to show up for the fora and talk to the press things? But this year, for the first time, I felt like it was really important to actually try to win. So yeah, I was willing to knock on people's doors, even though I always feel like you don't want to talk to some politician. You want to be watching the game. I know it, you know it. No, I'm really sorry. And there was a point where, I think the story of this election for me is I fell on my face on Appleton Street, and it was when I was supposed to be at an event, and a bunch of people, including the police and Councilor Rivera, who was at the same event, picked me up and put me back in the car, so people knew that something had happened. And I posted on social media that I was fine, thank you very much, I just wasn't going to be walking for a few days. And people began showing up at my door, saying, hi there, we heard, we know that you are going to be out of commission. Let us take over and do this. So I wound up with this astonishing core of volunteers who I could never have asked to do as much work as they did. They are amazing people, and also wonderful to get to know better. But one of them turned out to be plugged into a bigger political ecosystem than I was aware of. So I wound up with a surprise volunteer campaign consultant who does professional work. I wound up with people saying, no, you cannot send out 6-page, single-spaced screeds about policy. You must do actual, promotion. And sure enough, listening to the professionals and having an actual campaign seems to have worked. But at the same time, the reason I was willing to go along with this was twofold. Part of it was the city financial crisis and the existing rule, which I hope we will change now, requiring a supermajority vote for any ordinance change. We're working on it. The first chunk of it will, I think, be on the next city council agenda. But the other was the resolution filed by then Councillor Jourdain and Councillor Vacon talking about Holyoke as a sanctuary city, which frankly scared me to death on behalf of our inhabitants, because when I read the full resolution, it looked to me not merely as if it were reiterating our position that we're not a sanctuary city, there's no legal definition, etc., but also it looked to me, and I think I have now been confirmed in this by national events, that simply reaffirming that we were going to follow all federal directives was likely to get us into huge trouble if this went through. And the directions to send it to Washington were like an invitation for federal immigration authorities to take a good hard look at Holyoke and come here. So it was important to me to, just in case this thing kept going, try to be in a position to ameliorate any damage or prevent it from going through again. And nothing about the national environment has made me think that it was any less scary than I initially believed. So basically, for the first time, it was actually important to me, and I went way out of my comfort zone. And I had help, for which I am profoundly grateful and glad to have the chance to say, hey guys, you rock. You know you did this.
And it really resonated with the people who voted. And yes, we cannot ignore the 17% voter turnout for this past election, which is concerning, which is a problem. And also, let's mention, it's not the first time this number is actually the same or even lower in other elections. What are maybe some plans in your mind about helping to increase the voter turnout? And also, what are some other priorities that you have maybe reset now that you are in functions and that you are identifying the need for things that need to be put in that list of priorities to get the work done that can also help other parts of the work that may not be that urgent, but still to get processed in such a way that can be implemented faster than it used to be?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the 17% is concerning. And as you point out, it was roughly the same number 2 years ago when the results were very different. But it did take a big plunge, and it's always been worse when there isn't something like a presidential race around the corner. But I think that everything we can do to bring more people into the process and to make people understand that this isn't some exotic thing that is only for people who have social roles that have been identified as important to do. I hope that just trying to work more closely with the concerns of, broadly speaking, downtown is going to help. The more people who we can invite in, the more people who feel comfortable screaming at us, frankly, the better that number is going to be. And I also think that, honestly, if we can get any reasonable percentage of our joint agenda done in these 2 years, it will encourage new people to come into the system. I don't think that our new Ward 2 councilor has ever had elected experience before. And she's great. But it took people in her ward saying, hey, we need you, come forward. And the reason that people are going to think that is if and only if they see government delivering for them. We've made a big change, and we have a set of different, I think, approaches to things. And whether the tenant or Office of Tenants' Rights that Councillor Purcell has just introduced an order about can be set up fast enough to make a difference to people, whether it will be effective, whether people see change from it, if the city can see that doing that and possibly setting up a police commission, possibly just having a solid community conversation with the police department, changes perceptions and makes things better for, as I hope, both the citizens of Holyoke and all of Holyoke and the police themselves, because nobody wants to feel like an embattled minority who are doing a job that nobody wants. And there are good reasons why American myth makes police heroes. They can be. And I think the new police chief is going in that direction, and we can help him to the extent that the city council can be useful. But I think it's cumulative. The more you complain to the government and understand who to talk to in the government, the more whether or not we can do anything to help. If you at least understand and have experience that shows that we're trying. If it's a difficult issue and can't be gotten to now and you know why, all of this, I think, this is the encouragement that makes a difference to your willingness to be involved, because otherwise it's a big pain, and frankly, why? And this is also, again, Holyoke in some ways is a throwback. It's a very close community where people try to bring people in, and where there are still eyebrows raised if you've only lived in Holyoke 8 years and you're trying to do something. But this also has its merits in that there's this old-fashioned American middle-class tradition of participation. Like, I personally grew up with the classic structure of the mother who doesn't work outside the home formally, who is actually working full-time, frankly, and probably harder than her husband. And the family that just, you see a problem, you complain to somebody, the mayor calls you back, and it's just a part of the normal, expected life, not because you're somebody important, but because you live here and you care, and this is the way traditional America does things. And I say that knowing that traditional America can get a bad rap for very good reasons. But the best part of us has always been working toward, whoever you are, you come here and you're part of the big club. You can refuse to be a member, and probably we won't pester you. Or we will pester you, sadly, but we won't break down your door to say, why aren't you at the city council meeting? But there were incentives to join, and you were educated to join. Not in school necessarily, but just in your family. And because we're an old-fashioned community, I'd like to think we can bring this back, and we can bring it to every household in the city.
That brings to think how working along with the school committee and the Holyoke Public Schools may need to reintroduce or reinforce or refresh the integration of civic engagement, civic understanding.
Yes.
Because even if people do not have the interest, the capacity, or the socio-emotional caliber to face a full body of local government to ask them for something they have the right to, but at least to understand that they have that right.
Yes.
And that students in the schools, once they grow to be eligible to vote, they will know how to do this and how to make sure that the future can continue being functional, understanding the rules of civics and understanding how government works. So maybe this is a perfect opportunity to, as you mentioned, bring that back and also making it to be something that meets the needs of today's technology and today's generational view of things about how to connect, reconnect, and make the sense of being part of a community the most important thing, as important as being part of your own family.
Yes. Yes. I would love to see a full civics program re-engaged in our public schools and given the same level of importance that we give things like sports. And we don't now, but for the longest time, I've had this, well, fantasy because I am not equipped to make it happen. But I would really love to see some program that culminated in, as it were, a shadow city council, where students in the program would be elected to basically pretend they're us. You get the agendas, you get any briefings that are available, and you go in and you have your meetings about this and discuss the genuine issues coming before Holyoke and introduce orders to bring new things before your shadow city council. And just periodically we could brief each other. And I would not be surprised if a shadow city council of Holyoke public school students did a better job on a lot of these issues and came up with more creative solutions than we are able to do ourselves. I think adults tend to forget that kids are not stupid. They don't have as much experience as we do, obviously, but that can be a benefit as well as a problem. But, you have insights at age 16, 17. You know the world. And this part of it is fun. School should not be a horrible drag that you just have to show up for. And the other thing that I would love to do, if we had the personnel to do it, and again, that's probably not me, is something like the beginning of a classical law school education. Because I don't know, if I'm repeating something everybody already knows, stop me. But if you go to an old-fashioned Socratic method law school, like the University of Chicago, nobody tells you anything about the first day of class, really. There's no, here are my expectations for the year. There's a notice on a notice board saying, for this class, please read these 6 pages of a legal opinion. And you come into it blind, unless you already know something about the law. And the first day of class, your professor has everybody put their names down on a seating chart so they know where you are. And they will just turn on you and be Okay, what is the first word of this opinion? Mr. Jones. And Mr. Jones may say, you know, we hold. Like, no. Ms. McGrath Smith, what's the first word of this opinion? And she says, certiorari. And this is actually the correct answer, but we go from there. What do you think the judge meant by this comment about bargaining rights? Have you noticed that the end of this decision seems to go in a direction that you think is wrong? What is the date on this opinion? And after a while, the class just opens up and they start arguing with each other. And they argue with the professor. And nothing is stupid. No one is humiliated. But the point is obviously close reading, or you're not going to get it right. The point after that is, all right, in context, do you believe that this is correct? And what would you have to believe in order to think it was correct? And it's fun because you have to pay attention. You don't know when the professor might get to you and make you answer some question you haven't thought about. And I think the respect it would show for the students and the motivation to learn to read critically and be aware of weaknesses in what you're reading, in what you're watching. And it's applicable to video, too, in the modern context. If you take out the musical background to this, does it change the way you respond? How much of the meaning here is carried by cues that are completely disconnected from whether what you're being told makes sense or not? Do you see that? Do you notice it? And this is what a Socratic method education does. I would love to be able to expose students to that because it makes free people.
Being in city council is a big responsibility, particularly when you are a city councilor at large. It may sound obvious for everyone who is versed and understands this difference, but for the ones who doesn't, when you are a ward councilor and you are taking care of everything that is contained within the geographical limits of that ward, it's different when you are at large because you are taking a look at everything that has to do with the whole city in its whole extension. Do you think being at large is harder or will be harder than maybe just being a city councilor for the ward that you live at?
I think this is very individual. The ward councilors really get hammered with specific, can you fix this, can you fix that, local issues. And I think that's actually a much harder job. I am awed by my colleagues who are doing this. But it plays to individual strengths. For instance, my colleague from Ward 3, Anne, is just awesome at getting people together and making them focus on, all right, what do we need to fix this issue on these streets? And her ability to do that, even in the last 2 weeks, my God, you are an astonishingly effective person. Both by inclination and training, I tend to look at systems. And I think there's a role for that on the city council. I think, for me, it is easier to look at, say, snow removal from your sidewalk. This is a particular problem for a bunch of Ward 7 residents because they have a lot of sidewalk, and because, for instance, if you live on Route 5, contract snowplows come through and they wind up plowing a lot of street snow onto the sidewalk you just shoveled. And this is a burden on people who have any physical limitations, as well as time limitations. It is frankly a tax because that's city property. The right-of-way goes out beyond, or it's measured from the center of the street, so you're basically doing something for the city that benefits the city, not you. It is structurally unfair. It's a different problem in the rest of the city. And my training is more, all right, if we look at the whole city and there's a specific burden here, how do we think about equalizing the burden? Can we relieve it here without creating unintentional bad effects elsewhere? Whereas I think my focus on, if I were Ward 7 councillor, is just how can I help this set of constituents without worrying so much about the impact elsewhere? And one of the things that I have said, I think, probably to you and probably to half the people I've spoken to, is to some extent our ordinances are like computer operating code. We are dealing, because we have not been able to get in and fix things for so long, with not just a few patches for, like, security patches, this thing went wrong, we need to get in there and fix this little bit of code. We are looking at the equivalent of, we've changed hardware and we're going from Macintosh operating system 9 to operating system 10. This is huge. This is Linux-based, it's completely different. We somehow have to keep all the machines running while we write the upgrade. Once the upgrade is live, we're going to find more glitches that need to be straightened out. But I think being a counselor at large is the role that is tasked with what's the whole system. We have to look at how it affects everywhere. And I'm fortunate in that it would be a harder job than being a ward counselor if it didn't already fit with my training experience. For me, I think it's much easier, and I am in awe of what the ward counselors do.
So, what is coming next? There is a number of ideas already running and some orders already filed. How do you envision this upcoming months in terms of possible accomplishments, goals that you would like to see happening, if not for the whole city or throughout the city, but at least in terms of the structure and the ways that can make the city council to work even more efficiently and to have a better understanding of the things that maybe in previous iterations could not even get to that point of understanding to start thinking about solutions.
Okay, so the first thing is the Financial Modernization Act, which was, of course, the big argument, other than the social one, of this election. The financial system in our offices has been a disaster for decades, and everyone, including our current treasurer, will tell you so. The big upgrade is, in fact, a big upgrade. It involves bringing in a manager for the entire financial system of the city. It, to some extent, just swaps offices and reassigns existing personnel, assuming union consent, which is a big deal, to specific new functions. But if it goes into place, it should create a system where everything is being audited, where our government is not spending time doing things like making sure that the school committee or the school system's payroll can go out. I didn't realize our city payroll system and the school department's payroll system are not the same. And making them work together has been like hour-eating crisis after crisis for the people involved. And ideally, this should just be automatic. If it isn't automatic, we should be fixing it so that it is. The new system should address that, at which point we will finally have certified cash as opposed to we know that there's money in the system, but we don't know exactly where necessarily. And to me at least, one of the really instructive things that's taken place in this debate, where I think both sides believe what they're saying and have reason for it, but one of the things that happened when it looked like we were going to lose SNAP coverage for a lot of our citizens was that our current government was able to step in and start setting up, all right, we will take care of this. You will not go hungry. We promise. We have the funds to do it. Here they are. Which was a genuine demonstration that, in fact, the money is there. If we were broke and about to go into receivership, we could not have done that. So there is some evidence that, yes, the side of this debate that has been saying, get our systems in order, we can't just do this by giving somebody with more formal credentials the treasurer's job and hoping that they find it all and fix it. I think, to me at least, that won the argument. I think this is an experiment to some extent, and if Councillor Jourdain was right about the problem, we'll know it soon. If Treasurer Casey was right about the problem, we will also know that soon once we get this system into place. And one of the reasons that I'm also still banging that drum of could we please have a majority for certain ordinance changes is to be able to move quickly if there is a problem. But this obviously is urgent. Budgeting season is coming up. We need to know where the money actually is and how much of it is there. We need to know how much of a real financial crisis we have that isn't basically caused by Washington. How much of a financial crisis we have short term because Washington is there no matter what. And then we can make the hard decisions, or perhaps the less hard ones, about everything else. If we can get this out in the next 6 weeks, I will be impressed and happy. The next thing after that, that's a big project, is going to be the zoning reform and clearing the decks for the city council to be able to do more by getting permitting off its set of issues to deal with. And then we have what I think of as the substantive work. I mean, this is all like background coding. Does the machine actually light up when you press the button? But we have things like the proposed grants under the opioid settlement fund. That's on the the Development and Governmental Relations Committee's agenda for this coming Monday. If anyone is interested, tune in, send us suggestions. I realize this process is well underway, and it's been in the background for a lot of us because there is so much to know and so much for incoming people to learn. And this is one that I am actually frantically trying to come up to speed on. I don't have expertise, and I don't want to be interfering on something that I don't know anything about. But once again, here's a pitch. If you want to send us any information, if you haven't already weighed in with the bodies dealing with this and you want the city council to know about it, let us know. You would not believe how much stuff we don't know. And it's not for want of trying. But that is coming. It will have a major effect however it plays out. All the budgeting stuff is coming. There's at least one really important thing that I can feel hovering outside of my head that I don't even remember what it is.
But for that, we will have plenty of opportunities to continue catching up, getting updates, and getting to exchange these conversations about how the work is coming, what is about to happen that could benefit the public to know ahead of time so they can participate, so they can engage, so they can ask questions. And with that, create also through this outlet that extra ingredient for that recipe of civic engagement that we are in agreement that is important, that is needed, and that we can contribute somehow to make it possible through these conversations. So I really want to thank you for committing to this work and to making the time and for answering the call every time, for getting these opportunities to talk, to exchange information, and anything that from our end can do to help benefit the public with the information that is important to happen between constituents and local government, we are all for it.
Well, thank you so much, and I will not take up any more of your time today, except to say we're going to be calling on you because this is a wonderful facility, and we're already thinking about things like citizen town halls. And I look forward to seeing what my colleagues have to say as they come through this process. It's great to be able to stop and think about things at more length than city council time restraints really allow. So thank you so much.